People who set strong boundaries are often called selfish, cold, even cruel. But here's what nobody tells you. A 2020 study in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships found that individuals with weak boundaries experienced higher levels of stress and relationship dissatisfaction. The ones with strong boundaries, they reported deeper connections and less resentment. So the psychology isn't about being harsh. It's about something else entirely, something most people misunderstand. These aren't people who love saying no. They're people who've learned that every yes to someone else used to be a no to themselves. And that math eventually broke them. By the end of this, you'll understand what's happening in their minds that makes boundary setting feel less like rejection and more like survival. The first thing you need to understand is that people with strong boundaries don't feel different when they say no. They feel the same discomfort you do, the same guilt, the same fear of disappointing someone. But there's a fundamental difference in how they process it. Most people experience guilt and immediately think, this feeling means I'm doing something wrong. Boundary setters experience guilt and think, this feeling means I'm doing something hard. That distinction, it changes everything. There's a psychological concept called locus of control. It's where you believe the center of your life's direction sits. People with weak boundaries have an external locus. They're constantly scanning other people's faces for permission to exist the way they want to exist. Their internal monologue sounds like, if I say no, they'll think I'm terrible. If I cancel, they'll never invite me again. If I speak up, I'll ruin everything. People with strong boundaries have shifted to an internal locus, not completely, no one ever does, but enough that their self-worth isn't a democracy where everyone gets a vote. Their internal monologue sounds different. It sounds like, I don't want to disappoint them, but disappointing myself has consequences too. And that's the part most people miss. Boundary setters aren't less empathetic. They've just learned to include themselves in the circle of people they refuse to hurt. Let me give you a specific example. Imagine someone asks you to help them move on Saturday. You already have plans, quiet plans, reading, resting, recharging. Nothing anyone would consider important. A person without boundaries thinks, well, my plans aren't real plans. They need me. I'd feel guilty all weekend if I said no. A person with boundaries thinks, I need Saturday to recover from this week. If I give it away, I'll be resentful during the move, exhausted on Sunday and irritable on Monday. That's not fair to me or to them. See the difference? It's not that they don't care about helping. It's that they've done the math on what saying yes actually costs. And they've learned, usually the hard way, that resentment is more toxic to a relationship than disappointment. A 2022 study in psychological health found that people who regularly enforced boundaries were significantly less likely to experience burnout, not because they did less, but because they did less of what drained them while pretending to be fine. There's another layer here. People with strong boundaries have what psychologists call differentiation. It's the ability to be in the presence of someone else's emotions without absorbing them as your own. When someone is upset that you set a boundary, they feel their disappointment. You can acknowledge it. You can empathize with it, but you don't have to fix it by destroying your own needs. Their discomfort is theirs to manage. Your responsibility is to be kind, clear, and honest, not to eliminate every negative emotion they might feel. Most people believe love means never letting someone you care about feel bad because of you. Boundary setters understand that love sometimes means letting someone feel bad for you, so the relationship doesn't slowly rot from the inside. So what does this actually look like when you're watching it happen? First thing, people with strong boundaries are often unnervingly calm when they enforce them. There's no aggression, no defensiveness, no over-explaining. They just state the boundary like it's a fact about the weather. Someone asks, "Can you cover my shift this weekend?" Weak boundary response. "Oh, I kind of have plans, but they're not that important. I guess I could. Are you sure you can't find anyone else? Because I really was hoping to. But if you really need me." Strong boundary response. "I can't cover Saturday, but I could do Friday if that helps." Notice what's not there. No justification. No apologizing for having a life. No invitation to negotiate something that isn't negotiable. Just information. And here's what makes people uncomfortable about this. It feels rude because we're so used to people performing guilt to prove they're good. The performance goes like this. I'm so sorry. I wish I could. I feel terrible. You know I'd do anything normally. I just have this thing. Boundary setters skip the performance. Not because they don't care, but because they learn that the performance doesn't actually make anyone feel better. It just makes you feel worse. Now, when boundaries get tested, and they always do, this is where you see the real difference. Let's say you tell someone you don't answer work emails after 7 p.m. They email you at 8, then 9. Then they text, "Did you see my email?" A person learning boundaries might panic. Oh no, maybe this is an emergency. Maybe I should make an exception. Maybe my boundary is unreasonable. A person with established boundaries thinks they're testing whether I meant what I said, and they don't respond until 7 a.m. the next day, not to punish anyone, but because exceptions teach people that your boundaries are suggestions. There's a framework they use, often without realizing it. First boundary, clear statement. Second violation, reminder with a consequence. I don't answer emails after 7. If something is urgent, call me. Third violation, enforcement of consequence. The call doesn't come, then it wasn't urgent. This is where people accuse them of being rigid. And sometimes they are. But here's what critics miss. Rigidity with boundaries is usually a response to a lifetime of being too flexible. It's the pendulum swinging the other way after years of being bent into shapes that weren't theirs. Let me give you a family dinner scenario, because that's where boundaries go to die. Your mother says, "You're so distant now. You used to tell me everything. Why don't you share with me anymore?" Weak boundary response, internal panic. Am I a bad daughter? Should I tell her about my relationship problems? But last time I did, she told my aunt. And strong boundary response. I share what feels right to share, Mom. That's not about you. That's about me taking care of myself. And then silence. No filling the uncomfortable space. No softening it with, "but I love you," or "maybe later." Just letting the boundary exist in the room like a third person at the table. The mother might cry. She might get angry. She might say, "I can't believe you talk to me like this." And the boundary setter, they sit with that. They don't argue, don't defend, don't abandon the boundary to make peace. They just say something like, "I understand you're upset. This is still my decision," because they've learned something crucial. Other people's emotions are information, not instructions. You can receive someone's disappointment without treating it as a command to change. A 2021 study in Clinical Psychology Review found that people who struggled to set boundaries were more likely to report symptoms of anxiety and depression. And it makes sense. When you're constantly betraying your own needs to keep others comfortable, where does all that self-betrayal go? It doesn't disappear. It turns into anxiety about the next time you'll have to choose. Depression about a life that doesn't feel like yours. Boundary setters aren't free from these feelings, but they've made a calculated decision. The temporary discomfort of someone else being upset is less damaging than the chronic discomfort of them being erased. Here's the part nobody wants to hear. Most people with strong boundaries didn't start that way. They were the helpers, the fixers, the ones who stayed late, showed up early, said yes when they meant no, and apologized for things that weren't their fault. They were good at being accommodating, too good. And then something happened. Sometimes it's one specific event, a friendship that took everything and gave nothing, a job that demanded their nights and weekends and soul and still fired them, a family member who violated one too many confidences. But more often, it's not one explosion, it's erosion. It's the realization that hits you at 2 a.m. when you can't sleep because you're doing emotional labor for 5 different people, and not one person, has asked how you're doing in months. That moment has a name in psychology. It's called a differentiation crisis. It's when the gap between who you're pretending to be and who you actually are becomes unsustainable. And you either build boundaries or you break. most boundary setters will tell you there was a before and after. Before, they believed love was sacrifice. After, they learned love without self-respect is just slow-motion self-destruction. Let me tell you what the breaking point actually looks like. You're at a birthday party you didn't want to attend. For someone you don't particularly like, because someone you do like asked you to come, and you couldn't say no, and you're sitting there, exhausted, resentful, faking a smile, and you have this thought: I am volunteering for this. Nobody forced me. I walked myself into this prison. That thought, that's the beginning. Because once you realize you're complicit in your own exhaustion, you can't unknow it. You start seeing the pattern everywhere. Every yes that should have been a no. Every time you absorbed someone else's responsibility, every relationship where you were the only one bending. And the shame of that realization is profound. Because it means you weren't a victim of other people's demands. You were addicted to being needed. You confused usefulness with worthiness. And people, they could feel that. They could sense that you'd betray yourself to avoid conflict. So they kept asking, not because they were monsters, but because you kept saying yes. The developmental path isn't pretty. It starts with resentment. Mountains of it. All those years of swallowing your needs, they don't disappear. They calcify into bitterness, and that bitterness becomes fuel. Then comes the overcorrection phase. This is where new boundary setters become rigid. They say no to everything. They cut people off mid-sentence. They enforce boundaries that might not even need enforcing, just to prove they can. People in their lives are confused. What happened to you? You used to be so nice. And the person thinks, but doesn't always say, I was nice until nice became invisible. This phase doesn't last forever. It can't. Because extreme rigidity is just another way of being controlled by other people's expectations. Only now you're controlled by your opposition to them instead of your compliance. Eventually, if they do the work, they land somewhere in the middle. They learn that boundaries aren't walls, they're gates. They learn that no can be delivered with warmth. They learn that protecting yourself doesn't require punishing everyone else. But here's what stays: that heightened sensitivity to imbalance. Once you've learned to notice when a relationship is one-sided, you can't go back to pretending it's equal. Once you've felt the relief of not carrying someone else's emotional weight, you can't voluntarily pick it back up. There's a loneliness to this evolution. Because the people who benefited from your lack of boundaries, they don't celebrate your growth. They mourn the loss of your availability. And some of them, many of them, leave. Friends who only called when they needed something suddenly stop calling at all. Family members accuse you of changing, and they're right. You did change. You just stopped setting yourself on fire to keep them warm. And that's the price. That's what nobody tells you about boundaries. They don't just protect you from bad people. They expose the people who were only there for what you could do, not who you are. The people who stay, those are your people. The ones who never needed you to have no boundaries. The ones who actually like you more when you're honest about your limits. But getting to that place, you have to walk through the fire of disappointing people who genuinely thought you existed to serve them. So let's talk about what they actually lose. They lose their reputation as the person everyone can count on. And for someone who built their entire identity around being helpful, that loss feels like death. Because who are you if you're not the one solving everyone's problems? They lose invitations, not all of them, but some, because people stop asking when they know the answer might be no. And there's a grief in that, in realizing how many connections were transactional, how many people only wanted access, not relationship. They lose the dopamine hit of being needed. And that's an actual withdrawal. Your brain was getting a chemical reward every time someone said, I don't know what I'd do without you. Going cold turkey on that? It hurts. But here's the paradox that makes all of this so strange. People with strong boundaries report higher relationship satisfaction, not lower, higher. That 2020 study I mentioned earlier, the one about weak boundaries causing stress, it also found that strong boundaries led to deeper connections and less resentment. Because when you have boundaries, the time you do give, it's real. You're not physically present while emotionally elsewhere. You're not saying yes with your mouth while your entire nervous system screams no. You're not there out of obligation, performing interest while secretly calculating when you can leave. When a boundary setter shows up, they show up fully, without resentment. Without the silent scorecard of, I did this for you, so now you owe me. The relationships they keep become cleaner. There's no guessing, no mind reading. No wondering if they're upset but won't say it. They've already said it. And if they're with you, smiling, engaged, that's not politeness, that's choice. And people who are secure, they actually prefer this. They'd rather be turned down honestly than accommodated resentfully. They'd rather hear, I can't, than feel the coldness of someone who said yes but wishes they hadn't. The mental health benefits are measurable. Less anxiety, because you're not constantly bracing for the next demand. Less depression, because your life actually reflects your values instead of everyone else's needs. Better sleep, because you're not lying awake at 3 a.m. replaying conversations where you should have said no. There's a concept in psychology called congruence. It's when your internal experience matches your external behavior. When what you feel, what you think, and what you do are aligned. Most people live in a state of constant incongruence. They feel exhausted, but act energetic. They think, I don't want to, but say, I'd love to. They need rest, but offer more labor. That split between the real you and the performed you, it's exhausting. It's like running 2 operating systems on one computer. Eventually, something crashes. Boundary setters have achieved congruence. Not perfectly. Nobody does. But enough that they're not constantly at war with themselves. And that internal peace, it's visible. People mistake it for coldness. But it's not cold. It's just settled. They're no longer performing availability they don't feel. No longer pretending to have energy they don't have. No longer twisting themselves into shapes that hurt just to fit into someone else's expectations. Here's what that looks like in practice. They have fewer friends, significantly fewer, but if you ask them about those friends, they can tell you actual details, not just surface information. They know what those people dream about, fear, need, because there's space in their life for depth. Now that they're not drowning in breadth, they get invited to fewer things. But the things they do get invited to, they're things people genuinely want them at, not just a warm body to fill a seat. They disappoint more people, but they disappoint themselves less. And for someone who spent decades abandoning their own needs, that math finally adds up. The paradox is this. They look less loving from the outside, but they've actually learned what love is. Not servitude, not self-erasure, not the endless performance of availability. Real love. The sustainable kind, it includes boundaries, because you can't truly give what you don't have. And if you've given yourself away, there's nothing authentic left to offer. So here's what I want you to sit with. The people in your life who have the strongest boundaries, they're not the ones who care the least. They're the ones who've learned that caring for everyone else while abandoning themselves isn't actually love. It's just a slower way to disappear. And maybe the question isn't whether you should set boundaries. Maybe it's, what are you protecting by not setting them? Your relationships? Or just the version of you that everyone's gotten comfortable with? If this resonated, I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts below. What's one boundary you've been afraid to set? And if you want more psychology that cuts this deep, you know what to do.